Welcome everybody to the Fresh Start Alumni webinar with Sarah Bridge. Just to introduce who Sarah is. Sarah has been counseling children, adolescents, and adults for nearly 30 years. She has worked in hospital settings, community, behavioral health, and private practice. Sarah's in-depth knowledge of trauma enables her to work with a variety of challenging issues to help people in effective and empowering ways. For the last nearly 16 years, Sarah has had the privilege to work and lecture with Pia Mellody, training mental health professionals on Pia Mellody's post-induction therapy treatment model. Sarah also provides consultation to other therapists nationwide on this highly effective treatment model. And she also works with the Meadows program out in Arizona, consulting and training their therapists. The goal of tonight, as always, is to just have a really, hopefully meaningful and open discussion about trauma. We'll start with a couple of general questions, and then we open it up, and that's what makes these meetings so exciting, because like a box of chocolate, we really don't know what we're going to get. So that being said, Sarah, I guess perhaps an opening statement, how you view, in your experience, how you view trauma, its impact, something brief, and then, like I said, we got questions, and those questions will continue to come in. But let me allow you to just share a few opening words on the topic first.
Okay, thank you so much. Gosh, welcome everybody, and I'm glad to be invited to be a part of this. I actually was just recently out at Fresh Start, a little over a week ago already, and had an amazing experience there. Very excited about the program, everything that is involved in the program, and I just think it's an amazing program. So it was wonderful to be able to see it and to be a part of it. So just to say that. So I think you guys have all had a wonderful opportunity to go through just a high level program with very knowledgeable staff. And it's just one of the best things I've seen out there for doing family of origin trauma work. And so, you know, when we talk about trauma, I kind of separate out trauma, that there's, you know, trauma that can happen, that can be like, you know, a physical trauma, you get in a car accident, whatnot, medical trauma, which is also very significant for people. But I focus particularly on trauma that happens in relationship. And we call that, or I call that, relational trauma. So trauma that happens in relationship. And since you guys have all gone through the program, maybe remembering talking about how you can look at trauma, or at least I look at trauma with a really broad view. My definition is really ultimately trauma is anything less than nurturing parenting. And by that broad definition, there's not a parent out there, including myself, who's never engaged in less than nurturing parenting. We use a really broad definition because, in part, it helps step away from the blame game, in that as human beings, nobody's going to parent perfectly. And so to me, trauma that happens in relationship means that a person is being parented more from a place of criticism, and worse, not just being criticized, but even to the level of verbal abuse, physical abuse, even sexual abuse. And it can also be about being abandoned, the parent's not there for you at all, or neglected a lot, where something else is drawing parents' attention and they're not giving enough time, attention, and direction to children. Or it's also about trauma is when the experience is maybe more about not having respectful limits set on you versus being indulged. So anyways, so this very broad definition on a continuum can be anything from a neglect, like let's say your child comes home from school and they're excited because they got an A on the project they did, and you happen to be on the phone and they're like, Mom, Dad, look what I did. And you're say, oh, just a minute, I'm on the phone. And you never follow up and don't check. Well, that's neglectful. Well, that happening once in a while, as long as, parents follow up eventually, that's not a huge deal. There's no such thing as perfect parenting. Now that's on the low end, but if that's happening all the time where the parents never or not never, but very frequently not available to give time, attention, and direction, then it starts to move up that continuum, and then all the way up on that continuum to, just the horrible things that people can do, and really abusive, physically very abusive, or verbally extremely demeaning, or sexual abuse, and even worse. And that's on the other end of the continuum. And so I talk about with people with trauma that that as a human being, that we can be doubly blessed. And we can be blessed by, first, biologically, genetically, by not having a lot of vulnerability, and maybe even having, some significant strengths, like, being an easygoing temperament, being bright. Those are all strengths. You're blessed if you come into the world with lots of strengths and not too many vulnerabilities. And then you're doubly blessed if you grow up in a family that's good enough. And because that's as good as it gets. There's no such thing as perfect parenting. And I would say the majority of parents aren't intentionally trying to harm their children, but because of their own untreated trauma, their own stress levels, maybe financial issues, or a very difficult marriage and partnership, or lots of different things. It interrupts that they're showing up and giving a good enough experience. And a good enough experience to me is about affirming, nurturing, and respectfully setting limits on children the majority of the time, versus the opposite, which I was mentioning before. So the opposite of affirming is criticizing, opposite of nurturing is neglecting and abandoning, and opposite of respectful limit setting is indulging. So you're a doubly blessed person if you biologically, genetically, you come into the world with lots of strengths, and you grow up in a family that's more about those positives, so-called good enough. But again, I really don't believe that the vast majority of parents are trying to harm their children, but they may be highly traumatized themselves. And so people, who are wounded, so to speak, psychically wounded, parent from a wounded place, and thereby end up wounding their kids. And so that's basically, just in a general sense, how I look at trauma. The only other thing I would say about that in general, about trauma, I kind of look at trauma in relationship happens in two ways. It's either about a parent or caregivers or teachers, whatever. It doesn't have to just be parents, but parents are usually quite significant for people, that it's either about the parent is not available, they're too walled off. So that could be, the parent might totally be gone, which would be abandonment, but that can also include neglect. And when I say neglect, I'm not just talking about neglecting basic needs like food, clothing, shelter. That can be neglect, but also neglect can refer to not having enough time and attention and direction, that the parent is not giving the child enough time, attention, and direction. So that being neglect. So trauma, relational trauma, is either the parent's too walled off and unavailable, or the other way we get traumatized in relationship is the opposite of that, where parents being very boundaryless. And so it might be in a way where they're putting too much pressure on their child to be a superstar, to perform, or too much pressure on them to help out with younger siblings, or pressure is that they kind of pull the child into the middle of the marriage and have the child, trying to mediate marital problems between their parents, or maybe, having a child be an emotional caretaker where they talk about their problems and issues. That's one way to enmesh, where a parent is boundaryless. We call that enmeshment. There's a second way to enmesh, which is where the parent's being boundaryless, but instead of kind of having the child help in some way or perform, and the child is kind of getting a pat on the head, thanks for being so helpful or performing well, it's the opposite, where the parent is, again, being boundaryless, but they're scapegoating the child. So they're yelling, screaming, hitting, or sexually abusing the child. In a way, I kind of look at it as the parent is kind of dumping all their own issues, or the psychological word we use is projecting their own issues onto the child and treating the child almost like a trash can, that they put onto the child aspects of self that they don't want to look at and self-examine over. They don't want to see that they're part of the problem. Instead, they point their finger at the child and make the child the problem. So that's scapegoating. So you can either enmesh a child by being boundaryless, enmesh them either kind of in a heroic kind of role, you're such a great helper, you're so smart, you're so wonderful, or you can enmesh them like you're so bad, you're so difficult, or the parent is not available enough, not giving enough time, attention, and direction. And for a lot of people, they get both experiences. Sometimes the parent's not available and they're too walled off, and the child's being kind of emotionally not getting enough time, attention, and direction. And other times the parent's being boundaryless in some way. And so you get kind of both main ways of being traumatized. A lot of people experience that as well. Does that hopefully make sense? Or anybody have any questions about what I'm saying in regards to trauma? Does this sound familiar to what you learned when you were at Fresh Start?
I hope it does. There was a question here. At what point do we differentiate between neglect and abuse? And does it matter and vary depending on the child's needs due to their temperament or neurodivergence? When does neglect become abusive?
So I see neglect as a form of relational trauma. I tend to use the words relational trauma more often than I use abuse. Now, sometimes nobody's going to dispute that it's abuse if somebody beats the crud out of a child or sexually abuses them. Somebody who's been severely that scapegoated, where the parents being really mean and nasty, pernicious towards the child, or physically abusive, they're going to see that clearly as abuse. But I like to use in general relational trauma, which includes neglect. And so neglect, so a healthy parenting experience would basically metaphorically be this. It's kind of hard to show you on Zoom, but it's almost like if you could imagine, I'm putting my hand out, if I had a child right here, right? Metaphorically, that is healthy parenting. I'm here. I gotcha. I got your back. I'm here to support you. As you face the world. I'll catch you if you fall. I'm here also to show you different experiences. It's like you're there. You're not either not available or too much in the child's face, being boundaryless or gone, right? That's kind of the healthy parenting position. I'm here. Now, nobody's going to do it perfectly. You can't always be here, but as long as that's, everybody's going to have experiences of so-called, with the way I define trauma as anything less than nurturing parenting, everybody's going to have some experience of neglect. No parent's there 24/7. And in fact, if they were, and sometimes that's a problem when a parent's way too overprotective and doesn't allow a child to, fall and experience things, that can be a problem too. So it's not about being perfect, but if there are times where a parent doesn't show up that most of the time the parent acknowledges that, and hey, and there's some kind of rupture that the parent will show up and there's repair that actually builds resilience in a child. When neglect becomes a problem is when the parent, the majority of the time, is turning their back because something else is grabbing their attention. It could be an addiction, that could be substance addiction, or sex addiction. There's all different ways that people medicate and regulate in some unhealthy ways. It could be due to sometimes love addiction, where a parent is so love addicted to the partner, the child's other parent, that the parent is so focused on that relationship that they're not giving enough time to the child. Or it could be that their own untreated trauma, that they're in so much distress or depression, anxiety, that they're not available. Or they're a workaholic, that they're putting so much time and energy into work that they're not having, showing up enough for the child. So it's when more often than not, the parent's back is turned to the child, because neglect is like this. I mean, abandonment would be this and you just leave. Neglect is like this, like, what? You know what? Be a good girl, be a good boy. I'm really busy. What? Can you take care of yourself? Be good. And what are you upset about now? It's basically the adaptation the child has to take on is basically the message they get, whether it's directly stated or not, is don't have needs, don't have wants. I'm too busy, I'm too overwhelmed, I'm too drunk, I'm too whatever to deal with you. Be a good girl, be a good boy, don't be a problem, entertain yourself, take care of yourself. Don't have emotions because I can't deal with them. I'm having enough problems over here. And so when that's the predominant experience versus being given time, attention, direction, affirmation, that's when neglect becomes abusive and traumatic.
So another participant just asked, with all this knowledge and awareness, how do you not turn into a paranoid, fearful parent, thinking you're always going to traumatize your children?
Yes, really, really good question. So as I was saying before, right, it is a very broad definition. And part of the reason for that, really a big part, is really to move away from the blame game that, look, there's no such thing as perfect parenting. Is it good enough? The goal is good enough, not perfect. Perfect is an impossibility. And to me, if you just keep it simple, good enough is being focused on more about affirming, nurturing, and respectful limit setting versus the opposite, criticizing, neglect, abandonment, or indulgence. So with that, parents, we're human beings. We human beings can be messy. So there's going to be times where, we're not going to maybe be showing up for our child, or there might be times where, I don't know if you've ever heard of the acronym HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I like to add 2 S's, HALTs, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sick, or stressed. We're humans. And so, you might get crabby and yell at your kid, and kind of lose control. Or there might be times where you indulge the kids. I just can't deal with it. And so you're not setting limits and you're letting them do what they want to do. We're all going to do that sometimes. But the important part is if there is a rupture in the relationship. So let's say you get mad at your child and you scream at them. You were to yell at them, or maybe even, smack them on the hand or whatever. What is important is there repair? And I would tell you, I think it is always the parent's job to make that repair happen. Even if the child's out of line, I think even going into much of adulthood, that the parent needs to work on that repair. And repair might just look like, you know what? Hey, I'm sorry that I yelled at you. That wasn't okay. Yes, your behavior wasn't okay, but it wasn't okay that I then yelled at you for it. I'm sorry. And you make that repair. That's what's really important. As long as the rupture's not too huge. Now, if it's a humongous rupture where you really beat your child up, well, that's harder. That's a much, that's not so easy to repair from. But if it's, you didn't show up, you weren't giving them enough time, or you're in a really bad mood and you're really grouchy and you take things out on them, if you go back and you repair and say, look, yes, it wasn't okay for you to hit your sister. That's not okay for sure. And it wasn't okay that I lost my temper back and lost control. It's because actually when there's repair to those ruptures, that's what builds resiliency. Because again, it's really about not being in the extremes, because if you're a child where your parent tries to prevent anything negative happening, I even remember there was someone once I worked with where when he was a baby, his mother literally put boiled sheets all around the house so he wouldn't get germs. And she was crazy overprotective. And that was a problem too, because there was no, kids have to go out in the world and things happen. And you're not going to be in a relationship where, other people don't do things that, are hurtful or upsetting. Rupture's going to happen. And being able to get repair is what will build resilience. So we don't want to overprotect our kids too. And, one thing I talk a lot about that I think is so important is the importance of parents apologizing to their children when we are human. Because think about it, for a young child, right? Who's their first higher power before they fully, understand God, who God is? Their first higher powers are mom and dad. And so if mom and dad can make a mistake, who else gets to make a mistake? They do. And if mom and dad can make a mistake and apologize, who else can make a mistake and apologize? And then we can move on. So apology is important because it allows for a child to be a human. If my higher power is human, perfectly imperfect, then I can be human too. And the other reason to apologize is that it affirms a child's reality. So if you lose your temper and you're a hothead and you yell at your kid or you say something really negative or slap them, that you affirm the reality that that was out of line. Parents, and I think, usually it's unintentional, but they do, I don't know if everybody's heard of the term, but gaslighting, which is basically, telling somebody that, something happened or their experience, that didn't happen. You don't feel that way. I never said that. When they did, that's crazy making for people. And so when you as a parent acknowledge the truth, the reality, that helps kids, that their reality is being validated, because a lot of people grow up and they were gaslighted so much that didn't really happen. You don't feel that way. That's not what happened, or I'm not doing that, when they are. And it causes people in adulthood to start to question their reality. Well, maybe I am overreacting, or maybe I did say that, or maybe I did think that. And they start to really question their reality, which is a problem. I don't know if anybody can relate to that. But again, that's why apology, I think, is really important. So I hope that kind of answered, maybe in a roundabout way, but the idea of, look, it's not, the goal is not to do this perfectly. The goal is, when we know better, we strive to do better. If you're hanging out on, trying to affirm, nurture, and set limits most of the time, that you're hanging out on that side, you're going to be way ahead of the game. Yes, parenting is complicated, it's nuanced, but man, if you keep to some simple things, just like trying to be more about affirming, nurturing, and setting limits versus the opposite, you're going to be way ahead of the game. And when you do make parenting mistakes, just own them, acknowledge it, and then move forward. Kids are.
I think Sarah, what's fascinating about this discussion, that I suspect you're not actually coming at this as a parenting expert. You're coming at this from the other side of having seen the long-term of what happens when we don't do these things.
Yeah.
So whether these are the right things or not, it's ironic because you're coming at this having spent so much time with the 25, 35, 45, and 55-year-olds that didn't have this. And you're coming to the same conclusion that the experts that focus on child psychology do.
Exactly. And I would just add here too, that I would tell you, for those of you who are parents, the biggest gift you can give your children, absolutely, is get a grip on yourself. Continue to work on healing your own wounds, because as you heal your own wounds with a focus on trying to move away from self-judgment into curiosity, instead of judging yourself, why did I do that and why? Okay, let me try to be curious, because curious leads to self-compassion. When you get into a better relationship with yourself, automatically you start showing up differently with others and with your children. When you treat yourself better, you're gonna, be more compassionate and have more patience for other people and your children, because you won't be so allergic to your humanity, meaning that it's okay, I'm gonna screw up. We human beings are messy. If I do screw up, then I apologize, I'm accountable. And when I know better, I really strive to do better. That's really what makes a difference. I tell you, and I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but I think even when we're adults and even well into adulthood, there's still younger parts of us that are still waiting for our parents to get a grip and show up. And so I always say, with parenting with children, and people are concerned about the impact they're having. Now, if you're doing some really abusive stuff, like beating the crud out of your children or shaming and name calling in horrific ways, that kind of stuff, okay, we got to intervene on that right away. But if that's not happening on any kind of regular basis, the best thing you can do is get a grip on your own wounds, heal yourself, and you're going to show up as a better parent. It's so amazing. I've seen this over many years, so many times, that as the parent gets healthier, that even without directly intervening with the child, in fact, I was just talking to someone I work with the other day, and her daughter's, was adopted, has lots of issues, but as the woman I'm working with has gotten so much better and she's more regulated emotionally, well, guess who else has gotten a lot more regulated? Children. How parents are doing. When parents are regulated and managing well, children regulate with their parents. We call it co-regulation. So the healthier and the more regulated, parents, mom and dad are, guess what? The child's going to be more regulated. So, first of all, any live questions that anybody wants to chime in? Saya, is that you? You want to go ahead and unmute? Go ahead.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much. I have a comment and then a question. One comment is that there was a therapist that told me not to feel so guilty as a parent, that of course we're going to mess up, or I'm going to mess up. But if as a theme, I have a more healthy way of parenting, then it's not going to be so tragic, because imperfect parenting is good enough, just like you said. But yes. I like that. I like the word as a theme, because, if there's a scale and, 9 out of 10 times I'm messing up, then that's a theme of messing up. But if I'm as a theme not messing up, but I have a few mess ups, then it's okay. So that's my comment.
Yes, I like that. I really like that. I want to add one thing, because it's a theme. It's more about, it's kind of like what I was saying, more about hanging out in the positive parenting and not spending too much time in the negative, that's going to be a good enough experience. But I want to add that yeah, don't want you to feel too guilty, like way too, oh my God, I made a mistake. I, snapped at my child. Oh, what have I done? You don't want to be in crazy over guilt. And that's when guilt goes to the extreme. If you guys remember, we call that the extreme form carried guilt. But feeling a twinge of guilt when we do something like snap at our kids, or say something mean or whatever, that's actually a good thing, because guilt, the gift of guilt is it lets us know we're operating outside of our value system. It helps us make amends. And most of us parents, and certainly parents who are in treatment, working to get a grip on themselves, are not, trying to intend to hurt their kids. And so feeling a twinge of guilt lets you know that you're operating outside your value system, because you're trying to do right by your kids and do the best job that you can. And feeling a twinge of guilt, it's like, ooh, that probably wasn't a good idea. I better go apologize for that. So it's all about moderation. It's a degree. So a twinge of guilt, a twinge of your own shame, again, not comfortable emotions to feel. I don't like it when I feel guilty. I definitely don't like it when I feel shame, like, gee, I was a jerk. But you know what? Feeling a little bit of it, not extreme where I go to worthless or I'm a horrible human being, or so much guilt I feel immobilized and don't know what to do. That's a problem. But feeling a tinge of guilt and shame about my behavior helps me contain myself and not do things that are hurtful, and to apologize when I need to. So we don't want to totally toss it out, but we just need a smidgen of it to remind us, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And my question is, you said that when we make repairs and apologize, okay, that's the medicine that they need. And then, the damage, the trauma isn't there as much, at least. So my question is, what happens when my children are adults and there was damage without repair?
Yep.
And now things are changing, but is there more that I can do?
Yes. I would tell you that once your kids are well into adulthood, the truth is that it really is more an inside job. They've got to get a grip on themselves, right? And do their own work. But I think as a parent, you can't fix it, so to speak, totally fix it. They've got to do a lot of the work. But what you can do is showing up, you're changing, acknowledging their reality, listening. Like, I know with my kids, what I'll do if they tell me something, they don't like or whatever, is like, okay, tell me more. Wow, I can really see how that hurt. And trying not to overly defend myself. It might be like, wow, that wasn't my intention, but I could totally understand why it landed that way. Tell me more about that. Wow, I'm really sorry about that. That wasn't okay. And tell me more about that. And that can be hard, but what our tendency to do, is to kind of either shut down, don't want to talk about that, or start defending ourselves. I know I screwed up, but this was going on and this was going on and I didn't mean to. And that just shuts them down versus, I really want to hear more about that. Yeah, I could totally see, how that would feel that way. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for telling me that. And then you're making repair right there. So I think we can do that, to be available to talk about it, affirm their reality. If we have the funds to do it, I'm a big believer. I've always said to my kids is, hey, you got to do therapy or whatever, it's on me. I'll pay for it. Because I know I probably have part of the hand in creating the struggle. So, you can support in other ways. And just showing up and getting a grip is healing too.
Thank you.
Okay, just a few other, there's a bunch of questions coming in here.
Okay.
Let's see. I've been in therapy for close to 7 years already. How come I still can't even say the words, I was abused? And I still feel disgusted and ashamed about what happened to me. What can I do to get a place of more acceptance? I feel like I've been working on this for so long and not getting anywhere.
Yes, I boy, I hear that. And a lot of times people feel that way. So a big part first is, and I know this is easier said than done, and I probably annoy some of the people I work with, but I'm like, instead of self-judgment and self-loathing, let's try to get curious about why, this is happening, or where does that come from? This feeling of I'm disgusting, I'm horrible. Let's be curious about that. And so that's one thing. The second thing is that I don't know what kind of therapy that you've done. And look, I mean, I think I've had it because I've been doing this for 30 some odd years now, where it doesn't happen as much because therapy's getting better out there. That's the good news. But where people maybe have said, gosh, I've been off and on for years and I've gone to 5 different therapists, and I still can't, like you said, use the word abuse, or anytime I bring up the, what happened with my dad, I burst into tears. I don't even want to talk about it. That what I would tell you is that it's not that you didn't get any benefit from your therapy, but a lot of times what happens is people are just retelling kind of the story. And that helps at first, because getting what I call a coherent narrative, meaning understanding, gee, what happened to me? And actually, this makes sense that I'm struggling in this way. That I call it the issue of apples and oranges. That if you think about it, apples and oranges, they're both fruit, right? But they're both different kinds of fruit. And what happens is we can sometimes be an orange. And let's say oranges are people who've had a lot of developmental trauma in childhood, and they compare themselves to apples, people who had a good enough experience. Well, they're going to feel up like there's something really wrong with me, or they're coming up short. But if you get in a group of apples, then oranges, you realize, oh my God, actually, I'm really normal. I responded really normal to a dysfunctional situation. And what happens, so part of it is getting that coherent narrative and somebody hearing that and having your back, that corrective experiencing, validating that you didn't deserve it. But sometimes in counseling and in treatment, there's not then the next step, which is to detox around what happened. And there's different ways, and we call that trauma work, experiential trauma work. And you've all been through Fresh Start. So doing some of the work that you did in Fresh Start, a lot of times it's with your eyes closed, where you're imaging yourself as a child or imaging a parent and seeing them in the chair and talking from that place. Or it could be through some psychodrama if you did that. But through experiential ways, or EMDR is another way, some somatic work. There's lots of different ways to get at trauma. But the goal of trauma work is to detox those emotions, child emotions that got frozen inside because it wasn't safe to feel the pain or express the anger. There was no room for that. Or maybe, mom could be angry, but nobody else could be angry. Well, the child, you're still going to feel anger about things happen and pain. And so it's having a way, and we do it through trauma work, to detox those child emotions that have gotten stuck and frozen inside. Also to kind of release what we call those carried emotions that really we soaked up off of others, off our parents. And also getting rid of those shameful thoughts. When I hear you say, I feel disgusting, I'm wrong, immediately my thought is, oh, those are what I call, and again, the psychological term would be shame introjects. That no, you weren't disgusting, you weren't horrible, whatever happened, whatever you maybe did wrong as a child or was done to you, you were a child. And you're not disgusting or horrible. That probably the person, whatever they did or didn't do or whatever, that's really their truth that gets put onto you, and you soak it up. And so you feel horrible and disgusting. And so part of experiential work is kind of releasing those shame introjects and kind of going, hey, Dad, That was actually, you were being disgusting. When you called me a stupid idiot, or when you beat the crap out of me, or you touched me inappropriately, that was disgusting. I wasn't disgusting. I was a precious little girl. I was just being a normal kid. And so you kind of release it. I call it, not very, clinical sounding, but I just say that trauma work, it's like cleaning out the pipes, getting rid of the debris, and getting the crud that was put in you, getting it out and directing it kind of back. I don't mean in real life, but in the work back to the person it belongs to. Because ideally, after you work on trauma, that I know trauma work has been effective when basically the stuffing is out of the thoughts and the feelings, meaning that you can talk about even really painful things and you're detached, but not in an unhealthy way. Unhealthy detachment is like, I'm fine, I'm good. I don't need to talk about that. Why? I'm good, I'm great. That's not healthy detachment. Healthy detachment is more like, yeah, it was pretty rough. My childhood was pretty rough, but I don't have a lot of energy about it anymore. And I realized, that I was really a sweet kid. I was trying hard, I had attention deficit, and I know that made it harder, with hyperactivity, harder to parent, but, I was just being me and I was a kid. And, that I get it. I understand it. Sometimes people might even have some compassion for their parent. I get that they really struggled too. And, but I know I'm okay. That's how I know that trauma work has been effective. One of the ways I know that it's been effective is that the energy's gone. Like, I had lots of trauma in my childhood. I've been worked over so much that I could talk about any of it, and I just don't have energy. It's like, yeah, if you want me to tell you the story, I can. Now, it doesn't mean that I can't get activated around issues that originated in childhood, and often that would be around attachment issues. Sure, I can get activated, but the original issues that caused it from my parents, I don't have any energy around that anymore. And so you guys took a huge step by going through Fresh Start and doing a chunk of trauma work. But I would tell you the vast majority of people who eventually end up in some sort of trauma intensive or at a hospital or whatever, going through trauma work and doing it once, oh my God, you can get some really significant healing and start working with this. But most people, you need to, continue to do a form of trauma work. And I know, can I say, Yochanan, the plan that you guys have, or no?
You can, yes. They're all asking for it.
Super excited. Yes, with by popular demand, they are responding to you. And they are, going to be offering, a trauma intensive kind of part 2 where you can come back and do more work. And it can be more work related to your childhood, or it could be how this then started to manifest in my adulthood. You can do more work. And I, with people I've worked with, I love it when they'll go do an intensive type experience like this, or I do them privately in my practice. That's great. I've had people come to 4, even 5 of them over time. And they kind of chunk out their work, or I have somebody come to a trauma intensive and then an individual work. I continue further trauma work until we get all the pipes cleaned out. So you took a humongous step, and I imagine got some really great healing by going to Fresh Start, but continuing the work and continuing to focus on that, moving away from judgment and to curiosity and self-compassion, and really working to be mindful in the present of when am I getting super wobbly and moving out of my mature adult consciousness and into that child consciousness, into those old adaptations, those younger parts, and recognizing that more often than not, and being able from that growing mature self, reel yourself back in.
So we're gonna switch topics here in one moment.
Yes.
I do want to allow Yitzi had a quick question, and considering our time limit, will focus on it for 2 minutes. And then Tova has a sort of slightly different direction that comes up often in Fresh Start that obviously we touch upon. We'd love to get you to dig a little deeper, but Yitzi, go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for doing this, and Yochanan as well. These are always great. So my question is more of a functional question, which comes up, I think, with a lot of us, especially closer to the holidays, which is how do you navigate a relationship when the parents won't apologize, won't even acknowledge anything happened, where there was significant relational trauma or actual abuse. And, with a lot of us, it would be wonderful if we were able to do our work alone, not interact with our parents while we're doing that work. But because of, how Orthodox Judaism is set up structurally, that doesn't usually end up happening. And, people would feel really guilty for not doing that. And again, maybe the best thing would be to not engage, but functionally we are. And then, we'll go into that environment and it could be really damaging. So obviously can't control them, but do you have any tools or any suggestions how we can go engage in that in a healthy way? I guess maintain our boundaries, especially when you're kind of physically going back to your childhood and interacting with the people who did that stuff and are still pretending it's not happening or it never happened.
Right. Super hard. Just want to validate that first. And
Sarah, could I break in here with a question, which I think could tie into what Yitzi's saying?
Okay.
I sort of wanted you to bring up maybe a little bit about the adapted child and the functional adult.
Yes.
I was just thinking that that might be a little bit of the answer that you're going to lean towards, hearing, the feelings that come up and recognizing that it's coming, the hurt child, the adapted behaviors, and then the functional adult.
Yes.
So I don't know how you're going to answer this, but I would, it's so nice to hear you say all these things, even though I'm at Fresh Start so much, but I believe that for everybody here, it's just so validating to hear you talk about all this again. So I appreciate it. So I don't know if it ties into his question or
yes,
you want to do that after.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, look, hearing this and having it repeated and in different ways, and that's how I really learned this kind of work, and it got really deep in my bones in a sense that, where it kind of embodied it, is hearing it over. And that's why I think it's so wonderful that these guys are offering this monthly check-in meeting, because it reinforces the great work that I know you all did when you came to Fresh Start, and it's important to reinforce that. And so with the going back home, so first I just want to say there's a lot of grief. One of the things people don't tell you, that recovery, there's a lot of grieving in it. It's grieving what never happened, what did happen, and sometimes it's grieving what never will happen. So there's a lot of grief. And I think that it's, working towards getting to a place of sometimes it's accepting that, yes, miracles can happen, but probably this person's not going to change. And sometimes they're not changing. It's not just that they don't want to, but reminding ourselves that they don't have capacity. In your mature adult self, your functional adult, telling that younger part of you who so wants them to acknowledge it, saying, hey, hey, buddy, or hey, sweetie, look, I get it. Of course, we want mom and dad to acknowledge that. But the truth is, they're not going to, but I can acknowledge they were out of control. And what I'm going to do from the functional adult is I'm going to do the best I can to protect us when they continue to do that. I think actually the art of dealing with really dysfunctional parents or family members. I have a mother who's extremely difficult, and she would fit that bill, that she takes no accountability, and I know that didn't happen. And some of my siblings have no contact with her at all. But what I have come to, it's the art of I want to live in my value system, and I know she's old and she's alone, and I have some compassion. I think she brought this on herself. I understand why my siblings don't have contact, but my value system, like, you know, to have some connection with her, I try to optimize like neutral, positive. If there's positive, woohoo. I don't get overexcited about it though. I'm pretty neutral, so she can be fun sometimes. I don't get so excited about that. I also don't get excited about when she's nasty and the same person, because I've really worked on acceptance that this is who she is. And actually, it's partly a lack of capacity, because to face the truth, face herself and look in the mirror, even though she's a very smart lady, has nothing to do with intelligence, but people who can't be accountable at all and pretend it didn't happen, there's probably a level of narcissism going on. And you got to remember that with people who have that going on, that narcissism, and if it's kind of in the extreme, it's a very primitive defensive structure. So you can be brilliant, but have a primitive defensive structure that they don't have the capacity, because if they faced it, it's like they decompensate. They can't tolerate being in truth. And so what I do, what I think the art is, how do I optimize the positive that's available and hold strong boundaries to the negative that happened today? And so it's like when you go in that situation, preparing yourself ahead of time, like I'm putting on my armor, I know who they are. And yes, it's hurtful, but I need to remind myself that when they continue to say hurtful things or they don't acknowledge it, yes, that feels pain and I can attend to that. But I also remind myself, this is what I do when people do me dirt, when I know I don't deserve it, is go, ouch. And their behaviors really doesn't say a lot about me. It speaks a lot more to who they are and their struggle. And you know what? And I don't mean this in a mean way, but sometimes it's even like going, and you know what? The truth is, it's punishment enough being them. People who make other people miserable, they're pretty unhappy. And the truth is, sometimes it's punishment enough being us, because we can be heavy lifting sometimes too. But trying to remember it's more about them and work the boundaries we talked about, you talked about, that internal boundary, protection, containment. It's that, okay, I don't have to let this in. They're not going to acknowledge it. And I'm working on trying to accept that. And so it's that mature adult self, functional adult, saying to the younger part, it happened, it's true, I know it's true, and you didn't deserve it. And I'm working really hard in the present when mom does X, Y, or Z. So let's say you had a mother who maybe, is really nasty about weight or something and comments on that. It would be like, Mom, stop talking about my body. Mom, if you, keep that up, I'm going to leave, right? Or if they say something abusive, to say, stop. That's not okay to speak to me like that. And sometimes that might mean walking into another room and just saying, you know what, I'm not going to do this with you. Staying as calm as you can. Because what happens is if somebody is calling you a name or being mean, they're in what I would call the pig pen. It's very hard. It takes a lot of maturity not to jump in the pig pen with them and get muddy. Well, God, that's not true. And you did this. And trying to stay regulated. And sometimes that means, something else I want to add, but sometimes that might mean needing to take some distance, saying, stop. I'm not having this conversation with you. I'm going to go in the other room. It might be that. I talk about walls that if you're conscious, an unconscious use of a relational wall, like a wall of distance where you're doing it unconsciously, or a wall of always being happy, or those aren't healthy, but sometimes consciously using a wall can be helpful. And so first wall I talk about is a wall of pleasant, like you go and you show up and your parent or parents are really heavy lifting. So you go, you prepare ahead of time. This is what I do. okay, here I go. And I try to do all pleasant, which is I don't get real vulnerable. I'm relational and hey, and oh wow, what a beautiful table you set, and wow, the bread you made is particularly delicious, or whatever. Talking about God, the weather was crazy today, but keeping it pretty surface. Don't get too vulnerable. Sometimes doing a wall of pleasant becomes too difficult. So and over a length of time too, if you're having to spend a lot of time, then what I try to do is go to a wall of neutral, where I'm not agreeing with them, but I just go, wow. Oh, I can see that's really upsetting. Yeah. Kind of neutral. Sometimes that's too hard. Then I move to a wall of tolerance, which is right. Got it. Yep. When that becomes too hard, that's when I know I need to take a wall of distance. So I might excuse myself to the ladies' room, or hey, I'm going to go outside, get a breath of fresh air.
Time to leave.
Or leave. What'd you say?
I said time to leave. Once you get to the wall of, having to distance yourself.
There's a great little, I can send this to you guys and maybe you can forward it to the group, but a client of mine sent it to me. Let me just pull it up. So I just sent it to somebody today. Yes, and again, if this isn't about labeling people, I'm really not big into labels, but I do think sometimes talking about some things like narcissism, for example, it's not about trying to label somebody, but it is about trying to conceptually understand who that person is.
I think the advice that you gave about the walls is really useful.
Yes.
We want to jump onto another topic also.
Let me just say real quick.
Okay, finish this off and then let's move on to another topic.
I can pass it on to you guys, but so again, it's not about the label. It's just conceptually understanding what's going on. But this is a little thing. It says how to starve a narcissist. No emotions, short responses, minimal interaction. And if all that doesn't work, no contact. So less is more. And just try the walls of pleasant, neutral, tolerance, and then distance is the best way often.
You can see that was a whole bunch of advice there.
I know it was.
You're going to have to re-listen to this because there was a lot of tips there. And I think everybody's going to be able to use it come into the holidays. This is good advice for everyone. Thank you, Sarah.
And I know it's easier said than done, so be gentle with yourselves, okay?
Yeah, we're going to have to review this. This was a lot.
Yeah.
It was good.
If you get reactive, it's okay. Cut yourself slack. Don't be allergic to your humanity. This is tough to have to go back into a family system that not only was abusive, but continues to be abusive. And I get with your community, that is unavoidable a lot of times. So be gentle with yourself.
Thank you.
So I know you want to reach over. Thanks.
Okay, next topic. We wanted to talk a little bit about love avoidance and the love addict. Could you talk about the cycle, how it happens, how it,
Yes.
Teach us a little. Let's have some reviews here. There's people there's some people on this call that have been here over a year ago. So we could all use a little refresher.
Wow. Wonderful. Yeah. And you know what? There's a lot to love addiction, love avoidance. So let me say this first. I look at most everything on a continuum, okay? So just as I was talking about narcissism there, look, there's healthy narcissism. That's, taking care of yourself, right? But it's like a little sprinkle. Ooh, they got kind of a lot of sprinkles and the cap fell off and they got a whole lot of it, right? So everything's on a continuum, right? So what I would tell you with codependency, right? Codependency is about kind of being more in the extremes on those 5 core issues. What I would tell you is every codependent is not a love addict or a love avoidant or a combination, but every love avoidant, love addict is codependent. So it's about codependency moving even further into the extremes, okay? So that to begin with. Love addiction, love avoidance is 2 sides of the same coin in some sense. One person, the love addict, it's like it is an addictive process where you're addicted to the other person. Actually, you're not really addicted to the other true person. You're addicted to the fantasy of who you want them to be. Okay. And so, and what sets up love addiction is neglect in childhood, where you're not getting enough time, attention, and direction. And so, you know, if you're a woman, for example, and you didn't get enough time, attention, direction from your dad, that can set you up for love addiction. And for a man, you didn't get enough, you know, time, attention, direction from your mother, that can set in your, you know, primary relationship. We actually, though, if people think about love addiction only with their intimate partners, but love addiction and love avoidance can happen with other people. It's not about, you know, intimacy and sexual intimacy. It's actually about attachment. And so you can actually get love addicted. You can be a heterosexual person and get love addicted to somebody of the same sex. That doesn't, or gender, that doesn't mean that you want to be sexually intimate with them. It just means you want close connection with them. And so it really is more about relational connection. So the love addict is addicted to the relationship, addicted to the fantasy, and they fear that they can't survive without the relationship and get highly anxious about when their partner is distancing too much. It doesn't just have to be physical distancing, but it can be emotional distancing. They're walling off, or they're not giving, you know, the relationship enough time and attention. That creates tremendous anxiety because it activates abandonment issues. And as a child, if you think about it, you know, infants and toddlers, they stay in proximity. They need to stay in proximity to their caregivers because their survival is dependent upon it, right? And so a child, a person who grows up and didn't have secure attachment, they have what we call anxious attachment because there wasn't enough proximity with the parent wasn't available enough. That goes into adulthood. So when you're in relationship now with a partner, if we're talking about your intimate relationship, that's like ideally would be your reparative attachment experience, right? Oh, this is the person who actually really is showing up for me and they love me. Well, if your partner starts putting up all these walls and distancing, then that anxiety, that attachment trauma and wound gets activated. And so the love addict wants proximity with their partner. And so then you get kind of clingy and needy, which creates even more of a wall in the love avoidant. But they feel like the fear is like, I'm going to, in a sense, die, not literally, but I'm going to die if I'm not close enough to my partner. And when people go into love addiction withdrawal, for example, they can ruminate a lot about dying. It's not even, sometimes people can actually be suicidal and it's a psychiatric emergency for sure. But sometimes what people can get into that they think about dying, it's not so much they're suicidal, but they're ruminating about it because it's like, this is so painful, I can't tolerate it. It'd be okay with me if I didn't wake up, you know, or if I got hit by a bus, because the pain is that unbearable. That can happen in withdrawal. But so that's love addiction. Now, the other side of the coin, love avoidance, is that the love addict is consciously afraid of being abandoned and actually unconsciously afraid of true intimacy. True intimacy is, this sounds a little silly, but it does fit, is into me you see. Intimacy is when you really let somebody see all of you, not just the ways in which you're shiny and helpful, but you also let them see your warts and moles, so to speak, or that you're heavy lifting. And then your partner allows the same. They show you all of who they are. That's true intimacy. So the love addict is conscious of abandonment, has a conscious fear of abandonment, but an unconscious fear of true intimacy because they feel less than, not good enough, that, oh God, if somebody really knows me, like I already not so great. And then if they knew this about me, then they'll really leave me. And so it's of being fearful that they're going to turn someone off. The love avoidant consciously has a fear of intimacy, because what the love avoidant learned, love avoidance comes from boundarylessness. When parents are or people have been too boundaryless, what they have learned is that being relational with other people is dicey. It's heavy lifting. That, if I let somebody come too close, they're going to control me. They're going to manipulate me. Maybe they're going to want too much from me. They're going to suck me dry, or they're going to be mean to me and they're going to hurt me. And so they keep people at a certain emotional distance. They might be comfortable being a caretaker, but they don't want people getting too close, because what they've learned is that being relational, it's like being on duty sometimes. And so they have a conscious fear of intimacy, but they have an unconscious fear of abandonment. And because ultimately, if a parent is enmeshing you, and let's say you're kind of a hero kid, if you're being enmeshed, yes, there's too much.
I'm going to break in and ask 2 questions that are coming up about this topic, just so you could include those answers also. Someone's asking, could you be a love avoidant and a love addict at the same time? Could you be both? And someone's asking, what's the difference between love avoidance? Let me go back to the chat just to see it. What's the difference between this and enmeshment? Someone's asking.
Yes, so enmeshment is what causes love avoidance. Love addiction is caused by abandonment, too much abandonment and or neglect. Love avoidance is caused by enmeshment, which is the boundaryless parent, right? So they're parenting and they're either too much up in the child's business and placing too many demands, or having the child be their caretaker, or they're, scapegoating the child and screaming and yelling. That's enmeshment. And so I actually think as human beings, for many of us, the core struggle is about, on the one hand, this deep, deep desire to be intimately connected with other people and to be seen and to be known and to be loved even when you're a pain in the neck. There's a deep desire for that. And at the same time, there's a corresponding deep, deep fear of being relational, being intimate, because what we've learned in childhood is that being intimate is dicey. Sometimes people will abandon you. Sometimes they'll suck you dry. Sometimes they'll control and manipulate you. And sometimes they may flat out hurt you, use you, and abuse you. And so we've got these two, wanting to be close and being terrified of being too close. And so the love avoidant is more that I need to keep people at a distance, because being relational is dicey. So they consciously have a fear of intimacy, but unconsciously abandonment, because when you're being enmeshed, actually, ultimately, even though the parent might be too much in your face and there's too much going on, it is ultimately abandonment, because the parent's using you in some way, using you either to caretake them in some way, or using you, they're living vicariously through you, or they're using you as their personal trash can, where they're projecting into you all the self-hatred they have, and they make you the problem, not them. So, but you're ultimately being abandoned. So what can happen in love addiction, love avoidance, if the love addict, let's say, in the relationship starts to get healthier and a better grip, and they're not as needy, and maybe they start setting limits with the love avoidant, who's maybe at times disrespectful, and they start distancing, that can trigger the love avoidance abandonment issues. Because, whoa, all of a sudden their partner's out distancing them. And then they can get activated. So the other question was, can we do both? Yes. And that all depends on what your trauma is. So you know how when you were at Fresh Start, they're trying to figure out, how did you get traumatized separately for both parents? Because it can be different with different parents. But a lot of times people, so let's say if, again, we're talking about an intimate love relationship, that let's say a man, his mother, some of the times neglected him, didn't give him enough time, attention, and direction. But other times I meshed him. He was the prodigal son. He's amazing. He's so fabulous and wonderful. And so he's got these two experiences, and mom put a lot of pressure on him to perform and to be good and to be helpful. So, but then also there were periods of a lot of neglect, right? So both things happen. It's going to depend what his partner's doing. If his partner is being a needy goober, right, wanting too much from the relationship, then the love avoidance is going to show up. They're going to distance. But if their partner outdistances them and they're distancing, then the love addict part can get activated. And a lot of times people who can do both end up with people who can do both. And it can look pretty crazy because it's like 1 minute the person's like, stay away, I want nothing to do with you, you're too much, and they backed off like this. And then the next day they're like, oh, I love you so much, oh, let's go do this. And it's like, whoa. But when you understand, it's just that they can do both, and it depends what their partner's doing. Or I work with a man where we went through his whole relationship history, and he's, let's say, a love addict in a relationship, and boy, that cleans his clock. And then the next relationship, he's the avoidant, and then that, is too much. And then his next relationship, he was a love addict, and then he went back to the love avoidant. Like he would switch. It's like he would do that and then too much, and then the next relationship would be the other side of the coin, because he could do both. So yes, we can do both. Usually somebody's going to lean, you're going to lean more towards one end or the other. The experience, the earliest experience usually has a more profound effect. So if you had a lot of neglect early on, probably that love addict part with that parent is going to be more predominant than the love avoidant part, because that's early attachment stuff. So hopefully that answers the question. I think you were saying, both of you, that you want me to talk a little bit about the cycles. Yes? No?
Yes.
So is this making sense first, though, about being kind of two sides of the same coin? Because the love avoidant fears death by relationship by suffocation. Like, I'm getting sucked dry. It's too much. And just to say, the love avoidant, what they do when they feel like sucked dry and it's just too much, they'll distance from the relationship. And sometimes, they'll be in work addiction.
Should we pause for a second before you continue and see if anybody has questions about what you said until now?
Yeah.
Is there anybody who wants to ask anything?
Hopefully this is making sense and it's not too overwhelming. I know it's a lot of information.
Seems like we're good.
Okay, so I'll go into the cycle. So first I'll talk about the love addict. So what happens is a love addict, again, so let me just preface it with this. We as human beings, it's in our DNA, I believe, to be attracted to what's familiar. If you think back to early times or caveman times, right? That sticking with your own people, your own kind, kept you safe. So caveman time, if you bumped into some neighboring tribe and you never met them and you're like, hey, hi, let's be friends, you might get a, spear in your eyeball. Like, sticking to your own kind is partly in our DNA and survival, because we survive in group, right? Mammals do this, right? So part of it, we're going to be attracted to what's familiar, even if it's painful. And so with love addiction, even though you might be thinking, hey, so I'm going to use, let's say the woman's the love addict, the man's the love avoidant, that your dad didn't give you enough time and attention. And when he did give attention, he's a pretty angry guy. So you're thinking, yeah, I don't want to be with somebody who's not there, behind a wall and they're angry. Well, what do? You get attracted to somebody. Sometimes that can happen, where you're attracted to that, even though you're not consciously wanting that. I know in your community, sometimes marriages are more arranged, so you don't know somebody so well, and that attraction part doesn't maybe necessarily apply, but I think that there's a lot of similar trauma in terms of, I see a lot with the bit of experience I have in working with the Orthodox community, that there's lots of love addiction and avoidance, and there's lots of people who get both because there's both, because partly really large families, it can be hard, to give children enough time, attention, and direction when you have 10 kids. And then on the other hand, the enmeshment, the expectations, a lot of expectations, or, a parent who's dysregulated and angry, scapegoating a child. So even though, you may have been set up and didn't really know the person, these dynamics often show up. But anyways, what happens is that the person who's a love addict, they're in love with a fantasy. Sometimes it's who they wish the person was, or they just focus on, initially anyways, on the person's positive qualities and kind of ignore and minimize the problematic areas. But then what happens is eventually something happens, an event occurs or a series of events where, again, I'm doing the woman's love addict, the man in this situation, but it could be reversed as a love avoidant, where something happens and it's like, oh my God, he's not my Prince Charming or not my knight in armor, right? Maybe it's, the discovery that, a partner's using porn or something like that. And it's like, oh, and you go into withdrawal. And then, so an event shatters the denial. Person goes into withdrawal, love addiction withdrawal, which when it's severe is excruciating for people. And it can be a psychiatric emergency. People can get suicidal. They can have major cycling panic attacks. It can even get homicidal. It's bad news. Rage attacks. It feels like if you go into a bad love addiction withdrawal, it feels like unsurvivable, like you want to die, you can't bear it. And what is happening, so those ego states we were talking about going into different parts, when somebody is in love addiction withdrawal, they're going into that youngest ego state that they would have talked to you about at Fresh Start, which is that wounded child. It's like 4 and below. Yes, you're still your chronological age. So you might be a 40-year-old woman. But psychically, when you go into withdrawal from a psychic perspective, it's like you're 4 years old and below. But think about it. A child who's 4 years and below, it is life-threatening if you don't have proximity to your caregiver. You will die if they don't take care of you, right? So you psychically are going into a state where it was life-threatening. And that's why it feels life-threatening, because it's going back to your original attachment wound. Trauma stacks, okay? So those original attachment wounds, something else happens, right? Well, let's say, you have multiple abandonments, that's all stacking. So when your partner, let's say, distances and isn't, there, you find out something like that, not only are you dealing with my partner's distancing or the betrayal by your partner presently, it takes you all the way back to the beginning of the abandonment by your parent. So it makes it that much bigger and awful. Still be awful, even if you'd had a good enough experience, you had good attachment, and then you found out maybe a partner was unfaithful or something, that's still going to be obviously very hard to deal with. But if you have secure attachment and you have enough of a secure self, you're going to struggle, but not like you're going to fall apart at the seams, like you can't tolerate it. So I always say to people, have compassion for yourself, that you are psychically, yes, you are the age you are, and yes, it's not going to kill you, but feeling that way is understandable. And, good news, bad news is withdrawal is not a pretty place to go to. It's not fun. It's really difficult. The good news is you can get better and learn how to manage that and move through it. The bad news is that I've yet to find a way other than learning to, what I call, ride that really difficult wave of letting that wave crest, those emotions of like, I can't bear it, just riding that wave, knowing that emotions eventually come to shore. And that, sometimes can be just saying to yourself, okay, I know what this is. It's awful. It's brutal, but shift happens. I know I feel like I want to die right now. I can't take it, but I'm not going to stay in this state forever. And learning to ride that wave, you get stronger in it. And learning skills to manage withdrawal. It might be, I'm going to go curl up in a ball under my blanket in my bed. I'm going to take a hot bath. I'm going to call a friend. I'm going to go on a walk. I'm going to watch some mindless TV, whatever. It's figuring out how to get through it. But part of it is it's an inside job. You can look to others for some support, but you got to learn. It's not fair. There's nothing fair about it, but you got to learn to take care of that little part. It's not fair that you didn't get what you needed when you were young, but the truth is the only one who can really ultimately right that wrong is you. Nobody else can fix it. But we look to our partners in a sense unconsciously to reparent us, like, and say, I need you here, I need you here. I always give an example of this man I worked with, and he was a newlywed, and he and his wife started their new jobs, and she had a job as a teacher, and it was really overwhelming for her. And when he got back home from work, she'd be home already and she'd be in bed. And she asked him, can you please lay in bed with me and hold me? And he did. Now, I would tell you if that was an occasional thing, like, God, I had a particularly difficult day at work. I'm just going to lay down in bed. Hey, can you just hold me or just cuddle for a bit? That's reasonable interdependence. But what she asked for was that he did that every day. So every work day when he came home from work, he laid in bed with her and held her for an hour. How do you think he felt after a year? Suffocated. And she unconsciously is creating what she fears, which is the distance, because that's too needy. She's needing too much from him. It's okay to ask for some support, but she also needs to be working on learning how to move through that intense feeling as well, having the skills yourself. But that's kind of the answer partly. If you broke that love addiction cycle, part of it is they're gonna, depending on how old they are too, that a lot of that's their own work and figuring out how to regulate themselves through those, I call them, those big, huge waves. Because what we do is, like, if you've ever gone like riding a wave, body surfing, that sometimes a really big wave comes and then you're like, oh my God, that wave's too big. I'm going to let that wave pass. It's too scary. Or at least I do that. But we do that emotionally, where the big wave and it's so painful. And before it's about to crest, we do something to stop the emotion. Like we might go eat a bunch of food or have a little drink or do something to distract and not to numb ourselves out. What we need to do, and that's the bad news part, is learn how to ride those big emotional waves without medicating it away. And increasing our distress tolerance to manage that. Part of that, your child's going to have to learn how to do themselves, and in therapy, working on that emotional regulation. What you can do is to validate their reality and say to them, I get, I have a hand in what you're struggling with now. And I understand it. Like, just if they're open to talking about it, even being able to share a bit about your own recovery around it and validating that it's brutal. And you know what? I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to give you that time and attention. And it's, what I'm doing is, now that I know better, I'm trying to do better, and anything I can do to support you if you want to talk about this. But I do want to validate that your struggle, you come by it honestly, and whatever I can do to support you in learning how to regulate. I was saying earlier, you may have came on later, but one of the things, I always say, if you have the financial means, be willing to help your child with the cost of their therapy. is a very loving thing to do. Look, I had a hand in this, and I know I can't fix much as I would love to fix this for you, trade places. I know I can't, and I know I can't talk you out of it, but I want to support you, and helping you to pay for therapy is a way I can support you, validate their reality, and just, you know, be there for them some when they need, you know, somebody.
And Sarah, I suspect you would agree that while we don't ask for trauma, wish it on anybody, at the same time, by those brave enough to take on the journey of recovery and healing, we're actually giving a tremendous gift to our children by showing them there's hope. And that may not show up when the teenager is 13 or 14 or 15 or 16, but it will have incredibly powerful long-term impact.
Absolutely. And if your kid isn't an adult yet, they aren't well into adulthood, your ship in terms of righting the wrong hasn't fully sailed yet. You know,
well, I guess, Sarah, let me sort of move you, because I want to be cognizant of your time, and maybe this is a good sort of wrap up. Maybe some hopeful message. You know, you've been in the field, you've been on your own journey. I'm sure you've seen many stories, hundreds. You know, what we're going into the Jewish New Year, a year of renewal, a time of renewal. What sort of inspiring, uplifting, and hopeful message can you give to everybody listening?
What I would say to you, there is so much hope for healing that when people are open to dealing with this stuff and willing, I always talk about not so much focusing on other people, but willing to look at the three that's about me, my part, my struggle, what happened, and understanding and moving through it and working hard. There's so much hope for recovery. I've seen so many people recover from really extremely difficult abuse. And I would say, like, just even in my own self, that well into my adulthood for many years, I had a lot of shame, not feeling good enough, defective, that kind of stuff. Or I might look in the mirror and throw the hairbrush at the mirror sometimes. And I could have really big shame attacks and maybe, you know, lay in bed all weekend because I felt so bad and defective. So I relate to feeling like the one person who shared feeling bad and like I'm horrible or disgusting or whatever. I used to feel that way. It is really rare that I have any kind of big shame attack. I feel my own shame, like, oh God, I can't believe I did that, or I screwed up, or Sarah, you didn't behave so well. But it's more like that. I'm so much more compassionate with myself. I don't beat myself up, or if somebody does me really bad dirt, I don't blame myself for it. Like if I've done something wrong, I'll own it and be like, okay, Sarah, you deserve that. But if somebody does me really bad dirt that I know I didn't deserve, I don't feel shame about it or embarrassment. It's more like, ouch, man, that's super painful and it really hurts. But you know what? It's really more about that person taking stuff out that they're struggling. I mean, it doesn't mean to say that I'm not sometimes part of the problem, but just my own self-example, gosh, when I think about where I was in my, you know, younger adult years and for quite a while and where I am today, it's night and day difference. And I just
want to say, Sarah, I just want to tell everybody that you're not just saying that. Last week when Sarah and I were, 2 weeks ago when Sarah and I were talking, Sarah in her excited manner suggested an idea. And my excited manner, I accepted the idea. And the next day, Sarah came over and said, you know what? Teenage Sarah was a little overly excited about this idea. You know, I think we paused that. And
that teenager, yes.
Yeah, and I said teenage Yochanan, right. And that made me say teenage Yochanan was excited enough. So you not only talk the talk, but you certainly walk the walk. And ultimately, like you said, there's hope. It's a journey.
And it's not perfect. And that's a great example. You brought that up because yes, in our excitement and passion for the work, I made an offer. But as I sat with it, I was like, you know what, Sarah, that's not really the right way to go about doing that. That doesn't feel so good. That was my teenager, being a little like, I'm going to do it anyways. And I thought, you know, that's not right. We can do this another way. There's another way to do it. So I got back into my functional adult and I reached out to Yoko and I said, you know, that offer I made, like, yeah, I'm kind of realizing my teenager made that. And my functional adult's like, that's not the best way, but here's a way we can do it that I can be okay with. And that I'm, you know, I don't have to feel guilty or shameful about. And that's, to me, that's recovery. That's recovery. It's not perfect. It's not always pretty, but it's more often than not recognizing, catching yourself during a regression or even after, and coming back and getting a grip on yourself. Sometimes I don't always get a grip on myself and my teenager prevails, you know, but not as often as it used to be. And that's a way you can really tell, like, if you're wondering, like, how am I doing in my recovery? Am I really getting better? I will tell you an easy way for you to self-assess is look at those regressions, right? When you go to your teenager or your 8-9-year-old or even your real little one, that what you should notice is over time, less frequent, less intense, and doesn't last as long. So like what I was saying with a shame attack, my shame attacks were, you know, I'd have them every so often and they could be really intense where I'd be in bed all weekend and last 2, 3, 4 days. Now they're little blips. They're small unless something really big happens, but it just doesn't happen anymore. And so just by looking at that, or if you have panic attacks and a lot of anxiety over time, less frequent, less intense, and the duration is shorter. Or rage attacks, less frequent, less intense, and I get a grip on myself quicker. So that's how you can know that, yes, I'm continuing to make progress. And for most people, real change is gradual. It takes time. It's like, maybe not these days, but like the stock market, up and down, but there's a gradual upward trend. So sometimes you take 5 steps forward, 2 back, 1 forward, 1 forward, 5 back, but then you leap and you take 7 forward. It's like up and down, but the trend is upward. So it's, you know, Rome was not built in a day. And at the same time, I also don't think that it means that you have to be in therapy for years and years and years and years and years to get better. That treatment is getting much better, and the treatment that is being offered at Fresh Start is top notch. And I encourage you, if there's still more work to do, you know, go back and do another one of these. Keep working on it and stay mindful in the present. Try to be aware of those trauma reactions and trying to have your functional adult be on board. The quickest way I say it is, it's your job to start noticing that, like, suddenly, like, uh-oh, my 5-year-old's behind the wheel of the car and functional adult me over here is in the passenger taking a snooze. I need to wake up and go, oh golly, hey sweetie, you need to get in the passenger seat. I'll take the wheel. And being able to notice that more often, but with kindness, that you parent yourself with affirmation, nurturing, and respectful limit setting.
Well, this has been amazing, Sarah. I suspect we're going to have another round dedicated solely to the love addiction and love avoidant.
Yeah, we can do a deeper dive.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you all for your Start Alumni. And it's always a pleasure, and we'll see all of you happy and a healthy new year. Shana Tova to everybody. And
have a wonderful new year, everybody.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Absolutely. Bye-bye, guys.
It was amazing. It was great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.